people are designing trash, I wanted to design better trash. I was like, let me in on that.
It should be a tagline, Grace Cook designing trash.
People want to do the right thing. They just aren't always confident in what that right thing or the next right thing is. It's much better to have a plan that you can put into action than to realize that you have no plan at all when the world changes on you on a dime. It's really about the companies who are willing to engage in change management. That's what separates the winners from the losers. It's not because of the goodness of my heart. It's like, no, because I am a responsible business leader and I want to make sure that we are going to be protecting our bottom line and still deliver, the products that we want and have promised, our consumers for, maybe a generation.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Packaging Speaks. I'm your host, Christian Ellis, and today I'm joined by Grace Cook. Grace has more than a decade in the industry, much of it focused on sustainability efforts, and I'm very happy to have her on the show today. Welcome, Grace. Hello.
Hi, Christian. Nice speaking with you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. I wanted to talk, for a lot of reasons. First off, sustainability is a topic that has been growing a lot over the last decade and is certainly never going to go away. And I thought, given your expertise and experience in the space, it would be an interesting conversation to have and share with the packaging world.
Yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I guess then to start it off, can you tell me how you found packaging as a career, how you found packaging engineering as a degree?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to kind of go back to the beginning, right? When we ask 17, 18-year-olds to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, all of a sudden, I was very set on going to Clemson University. That's a kind of a family thing, family tradition, if you will. And so that I was really sure about. But I actually was lucky to have a good family friend who knew me really well, knew my kind of desire and preferences and enthusiasm for science and things within school. And he actually suggested that I go tour the packaging science department before I ever even started freshman orientation, so over the summer. And that experience really was impactful for me because I got to have one of the professors kind of tour me around, and every lab that we went into, everyone who was, all these tenured professors, they just stopped what they were doing, even though they were busy getting ready for the school year that was kicking off in a couple of days. They stopped what they were doing and had a chat with me and were really, immediately invested in getting to know me and why I might be interested in this major. And it was really clear from that experience that whole department really was from industry. So these weren't folks who had kind of lived a career in academia, but they were really about training up their students to be the new hires they would want if they were still in industry. And they were really dedicated in creating the curriculum and, those skills and instilling that into their graduates. So that just applicability really resonated with me because I am, interested in learning for learning's sake, but I have always been a kind of a so what kind of kid of like, great, yeah, that's interesting and all, but like, what do we do with that information now? And just the, applied nature and the real world application of packaging really spoke to that kind of, so what energy that I've always had. And I knew if I went into that major and studied alongside these professors, that I would have skills that I could put immediately to use, and it would be a lot less theory and it would be a lot more hands-on.
An excellent advertisement, I think, for the folks at Clemson. You keep in touch? Are you active in the Alumni Association? Do you keep in touch with anybody from school?
I've been far away, so I'm sure we'll get into this, but I spent about a decade in Cincinnati, which had kind of a mini alum association there, awesome. Where folks would get together and watch games and things like that. But actually, now that I'm closer to the Carolinas, I plan to be able to do a lot more to that extent.
All right. Well, yeah. You said we'll talk about it a little. Let's. You mentioned Ohio. That's quite a get. Procter and Gamble coming right out of school. They're a very reputable, known to invest in their packaging group. Talk to me about your experience at Procter and Gamble and how did you land there right out of school? Did you know somebody there? How did all that work?
We had, so one of our alum actually came back to Clemson, who, she had graduated and started working at P&G within package development. She came back and was recruiting. And so I listened to her pitch. We had, companies coming in to talk about their internships really all the time. The co-op program was really big and emphasized at Clemson as well. And so we, that pitch really resonated with me. I am not too much into kind of consumerism and making products for the sake of making products, but making soap, I think, is pretty important to a healthy and functioning society. And that's a lot of what P&G does. So, I was really eager to kind of see that experience. And just my first summer in Cincinnati and working at P&G was a great experience. I was obviously learning a ton, as anyone is, really in that first kind of corporate setting. But I also was making a lot of friends kind of inside and outside of that organization, just, around the city and also, side by side with other interns. So it was a really, I think, just socially, personally, and professionally productive experience to be able to work in there. And I was really honestly having a lot of fun that first summer. It was kind of like a Mythbusters internship where we were doing a lot of drop testing and trying to do competitive benchmarking on impact testing on caps. And so I was just smashing and wrecking shampoo bottles pretty much all summer long. And then, and the cleanup was smelled great and was, easy and didn't turn your stomach or anything either. Yeah. So, it was a really awesome introduction to kind of what, life could be like as a packaging professional. It was fun. It was hands-on, and, we got the results that we needed, and it felt like it was, leading somewhere and adding up to, informed decisions for them ultimately. So, I had a great kind of first experience, and ultimately, it led me to come back for a second internship. And, coming out of school, looking for a full-time gig. I mean, I had other offers, but I ultimately knew so much about what was going to be my experience if I moved to Cincinnati and started working for P&G full time, that it was a very known situation, and ultimately a great decision to move out of state. I grew up in South Carolina, so it was great to have spread my wings a little bit and be in a new city with some friends, pretty freshly made friends over the last few years. So. It was a great kind of jumping off point because they obviously have a huge organization. I mean, P&G has 100,000 employees. So it's just a massive network of really talented, folks. And they really focus on leadership skills and mentorship in a way that, I think is really unique, amongst, compared to other companies. So
you also, I think, make an excellent point that, moving away for your first job was helpful to you. I have talked with a lot of recent graduates. Oh, I really want to stay in Michigan. I'm really looking to stay near my parents. I've lived here my whole life. I went to school here. I'd like to be in the area. Well, you may be able to graduate from Clemson or Michigan State and find something in the area. But really, if you are willing and able to move around, especially in the first 5 to 10 years of your career, and go out and get some experience and see the country and live on your own and all those things, that really opens a lot of doors for you, and growing your network and really opening possibilities for your career as you develop. So good for you for getting out and seeing the world a little. Also, one of the things I often look for, and I assume others in the industry, great sign when you've done 2 internships and then they wanted to hire you, so while you could have gone somewhere else, maybe in that first job, being able to point back to your resume and say, look, I interned and I did such a good job. They wanted to hire me again and I stayed for a long time. That's a great selling point as you look for your next opportunity too. Just for those folks out in the audience who might be considering their next change, if you can point to places like that in your resume, that's a good seller.
Sure. I mean, and I'll just, take a second to give the folks within P&G a little bit of credit on that too, because it was actually a tough time. And I think right now we're similarly in some kind of interesting economic times. And they were actually, even though both of my internships had been within research and development, R&D was under a hiring freeze when it came time for me to actually graduate. And they couldn't extend an offer within R&D because they were just under a hiring freeze and that just wasn't possible. So it was a little touch and go there for a minute, but they called me and said, "Hey, listen, we're looking at all of our other, organizations and the other opportunities and openings that we may have." And so they actually found a more kind of downstream packaging role for me that was outside of R&D. It was more so in kind of manufacturing operations and really liaised between corporate headquarters and the plants. And so like our actual manufacturing sites. And so I ended up getting the full-time role, still working within, packaging for sure, but in a different part of the organization. And they really kind of fought to be able to place me in a time where it was tricky. And I think it's relevant because right now we're kind of seeing, some similar kind of cycles, be revisited here.
Yeah, things have gotten a little complicated for us finding new work. There's less out there. There's certainly plenty of hiring happening still, but there are more packaging engineers on the market than any time I can recall, at least in recent history. So, the market's a little wonky at the moment. Talk to me about how were you persuaded to leave P&G? What about your transition to Kao?
Sure. Yeah. So I moved from Procter & Gamble after a little over 5 years or so to Kao. Kao, for those who are unfamiliar, is a Japanese competitor of P&G. Honestly, a really similar type of company in the sense that they've also been around since the 1800s, and they make everything from shampoo to diapers, and so a lot of similar kind of product lines as well. But ultimately, one of the major differences is, I mentioned kind of employee count at Procter & Gamble. It's a great organization, but ultimately a very large organization. And so to have, your voice heard is a rarity, and I mean that in the sense of obviously that your immediate one-up managers are listening ears and things like that. But to be able to actually drive change and kind of have the impact that I was hoping to have in my career, I ultimately was led towards looking to a smaller organization. And so I went from, Procter & Gamble, where I had kind of shifted roles before leaving to be, back within R&D and within package development. But there's, hundreds, if not a couple thousand people who work in packaging within P&G. And in North America for Kao, the organization for packaging was about 15 people. At our headquarters. And so it was a much smaller team. And, overall Kao has about 30,000 employees. And so it was just much more easy to navigate. And I saw the opportunity to be able to still be able to, deliver packaging to the market, qualify, do all the hands-on testing that I really appreciate about those types of roles, and kind of own the specification creation, like all the way through seeing that come to real life. And I think there's a lot of satisfaction that packaging engineers get to have when they get to kind of see the before and after of like, this is what I created and here it is on the shelf, right? That's something that a lot of careers don't have. So I knew I was going to be able to maintain that, but I also had some hopes that with a smaller organization, I might be able to do that in a way that was a little bit different and a little bit more focused on sustainability and more authentic to kind of what my goals were. So, coming into that organization, it was really, readily apparent that I was able to kind of see some issues or gaps or just things that we needed to do. I mean, organizations are always constantly changing and evolving and having to adapt to these external pressures. And some of the things, during that time that we were trying to navigate were things like the UK plastics tax and okay, well, if we have to put, 30% PCR in all of our packages, how are we going to do that? And even if we did, how would our specification system even tell us that we had done that, right? And so there were all of these different kind of gaps that we were starting to see and uncover. And so I also, realized that Kao had these large corporate sustainability and specifically greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets. But there was a bit of a disconnect in a sense that folks thought that was kind of like Tokyo's problem because corporate had committed to that. So they'll probably figure that out. And it wasn't super clear yet how, all of us were supposed to be playing a role towards that end goal. And so I really took it upon myself to lay out what some targets could be within package development around the way that we design things and bring specific types of materials to market or not. And also start to kind of vet our designs, because I think we had probably really familiar conversations with like our marketing and sales folks, where it was kind of round and round of, well, glass is the new thing and it's so sustainable because you can recycle it, except that curbside recycling rates are going down and glass is really heavy to ship. And so that's like higher emissions in transportation, right? And so like the things that maybe appear sustainable on the surface, when you dig a little bit deeper and have more of that life cycle thinking approach, it tells a different story, right? And you get to a different answer. So we ended up, I really just saw this kind of gap of the conversations being not necessarily informed by data. And so I really wanted to just change the way that we were approaching and like baking in sustainability into all of our projects. And at Cal, they were super supportive and in agreement that this was, it was the time, right? It was like, it was kind of right place, right time to be able to make shifts in the way that our workflow process existed. So starting out making kind of specific targets around sustainability for Pac Dev, and then also changing the systems and tools that we had in place in order to be able to deliver that. So using kind of these quick comparative lifecycle assessments to have design conversations in real time with our cross-functional partners, so that we could all see the data and say, yeah, if we do this material versus that, or if it's the same tube, but it's, recycled content versus bio-based, like what does that mean for the emissions or for the water use? And we started to have much more informed and richer conversations about the types of packages that we wanted to bring to market and bring to life. And then ultimately, I also ended up owning kind of the revamp of our specification system that I think was older than I was at the time. And so I was able to kind of shepherd some other contractors, which I'm very grateful to have, because I am not a coder by any means. But I kind of knew what needed to change and the logic that needed to be in place to have those calculations kind of come out for all of our different packaging formats. So it was a really awesome kind of case study in all the different types of hats that you can wear, in addition to just, bringing that latest package to market to, to put the new SKU on the shelf. I got to do a lot more in addition to that. And Cal was super supportive in making that possible.
I mean, hearing you talk about looking at a life cycle analysis 3, 4, 5 years ago, more than that even, you're kind of leading the curve in some ways. I think, now certainly there's a lot of talk about LCAs and glass weights and all this stuff, but I feel like that conversation was really just starting at that time. How did you, when you say you developed sustainability targets for Cal, where did that inspiration come from? Did you learn about sustainability targets in school? Was that part of your growth at P&G? Was that just reading you did on your own? Talk to me about how you came out of college and then took your personal standards, your ethics, and molded that into a direction you wanted to take your career.
Sure. I mean, I guess I will start by just saying that the reason that I got into packaging in the first place was sustainability. It was just like, how can I make the quickest impact? And if you think about, some of the first projects that I got to, that I was assigned, within P&G, it was take 3 grams off of this bottle, right? Or, hey, we need to make this label substrate like barely thinner, right? And so all of these things that seem kind of like footnotes, when you multiply that by the millions of units that they're producing every year, it's a massive impact. And so, in the early years when I was, 18 or so and getting really just introduced to packaging as a field, and it started to dawn on me that while I would love for us to live in this like kind of closed loop utopia, the reality is that a lot of packaging today and then for sure, it ends up being trash. And so when I found out people are designing trash, I wanted to design better trash. I was like, let me in on that up front, because I have, I'd like to kind of, insert some other perspectives and some other ideas about how we design trash and how we can kind of minimize
tagline, Grace Cook designing trash.
Yeah, I'm not sure how true it is anymore, given kind of my day-to-day responsibilities at present, but it definitely was kind of a bit of a mantra. It's like, we have so much power in these upfront decisions. And it's not always leverage. It's so easy to just call up the same supplier and ask for the same exact, material we always have and go to the
Right.
same molder. And so it's just so much easier to kind of go through the muscle memory and do what we've always done. But I think that there's a lot of space for someone if you just ask a few extra questions, and if you're willing to take on putting up a backup option side by side in those controlled temperature rooms, just to see, we know what our lead option is, but can we just place a backup just to see what happens, and like really start to do some of this research and development instead of kind of so much of it is kind of just like copy and paste, and it's safe, right? We know that we can get this product to market reliably, and that's really important too. But so is the exploration. And I feel like we miss the opportunities to do some of this incremental exploration because it's like, it's 10% more work, right? But if you're willing as the individual contributor and as like the executor of these things, if you can keep your lab notebook, detailed and just add an extra page and really take that onus on you, then you can start to build up a database that can support different decisions, a year from now, 2 years from now, or even farther out. You are building up something else for someone to reference in the future and build a case for just trying something a little bit different and hopefully a little bit more sustainable.
Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
There are so many of my contacts, so many of the recent podcasts I've done are with consultants who are running their own businesses or are working for small consultancies, or I'm trying to do fractional work so I can work from home, or whatever the case is. So much of the work right now, I feel like, is just in helping companies understand the packaging they're already using, and generating data and making sure it's accessible and formatted properly and in some kind of system that other engineers will be able to access and use throughout the organization. I guess, intellectually, of course, I've always known that you can't make a decision unless you understand everything that's at play. But it seems like a lot of life cycle analysis, a lot of the spec work, a lot of the ground level work that needs to be done to really make packaging greener, to really drive innovation forward, is really only starting now because of EPR laws, and like companies have to be mandated into this stuff, don't they?
It's unfortunately like it seems that way. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, and I think that, compliance can be, all these regulations, they can be a helpful, driver to kind of get things in action. But I think, ultimately there's also so much of a business case to be made for so many of these aspects of sustainability. And so, I think it's tough, right? When we say like, we'd like to use more PCR because it's lower emissions, right? Because these are recycled materials, often domestically recycled, which is great. But it has, historically been more expensive than virgin. And so like there's an economic piece of this that isn't making sense. But if you think about some of the bigger picture of the business value, when you think about like supply disruption, you're going to want to have a backup supplier. You may want to have a backup material. So it's not just, going from, one resin manufacturer to another with the exact same spec, but it's actually diversifying like the materials that you think your product and your package and your manufacturing line and your, consumer use case, like all of those things can actually handle. And like, can we widen that operating window to be acceptable for to actually have, an appetite to be able to incorporate different materials so that you're not just stuck with a single source supply. Because I think as we move into, more, not to be doomsday, but we saw this a lot with the pandemic, right? And I'll often make this analogy. It's like businesses would have been doing things a little bit differently if they had known a pandemic was coming, but no one knew COVID-19 was coming, right? And so that all took us by surprise. But climate change, most of us realize is coming / is already here. And so the way that that's going to play out may not be exactly and precisely known, but we know big picture, more storms, more intense storms. We understand that all of these things like carbon border adjustment mechanisms where we're actually getting, taxed by having more emissions intensive production stateside versus how it's being made elsewhere globally. All of these things, whether it be kind of carbon taxes or, the storms themselves, all these various kind of climate related risks can actually really help inform and keep business business leaders with their eyes wide open about how they should be operating for the future, because you're going to want to have more tools in your toolbox than what has historically worked. Like we can't be designing with the same exact, pretending like, oh, we only have the materials that we had 50 years ago. I mean, that's not fair and it's not wise. And I think, one of the other challenges is really just thinking about like scale. I feel like one of the things that I wish that I could, change just with a snap of my fingers is thinking about so many of the innovative materials and startups that are out there that are thinking about these new ways that we can actually use more bio-based materials, or, like all of the great like examples of people using mushrooms and really like growing materials in labs, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all of this is so innovative and has so much promise, but oftentimes, they can't scale to the rate to become this kind of sole supplier and all of a sudden completely, do a 1-for-1 swap for some major CPG. They can't just like take all the EPS that a company used to use and now, meet all of that demand overnight. And so that's a lot of mushroom, right? So it's this scaling kind of in step with one another, and companies being willing to big, stable, companies that don't really do disruption and change. That's not really the name of their game. Being able to support the, small startup disruptors that maybe are going to have a pilot level this year, and before they ever get to production is really, it's really key if we actually want to see the change. And so figuring out where you actually can foster that and be patient, and know that you have the tons of buying power as a CPG, and so you can always find likely another material as long as you have package engineers willing to go qualify it and take it through just the stage gate processes. So I think that there's actually a lot more kind of reward to be gained by, again, some of this just additional exploration and just considering these possibilities.
Does that maybe segue us into your current role?
Yeah, probably so. I probably can't, it's hard for me to not talk about that. I think at this point it's always really top of mind, but sure. So at present, I work for Ramboll, which is a Danish firm. And so they are actually an architecture, engineering and management consultancy. And so I work within management consulting here, and we have a whole team really globally that works specifically within ESG and sustainability topics. And so that really runs the gamut from circular economy services and making things like, packaging strategies and packaging targets and figuring out which kinds of EPR laws are going to be impacting your business the most. So there's a lot that is overlapping with my past career. But it also goes much broader than that. And we support companies with their decarbonization work. So not just, taking inventory of what their greenhouse gas emissions are, but actually figuring out how to reduce those in realistic and tangible ways. And so we have kind of more PhDs than you can shake a stick at. Okay. And so there's a wealth and like a huge pool of experts. And I guess on that kind of trend of kind of going towards, smaller companies with each move. Ramboll has 18,000 employees globally. And so it is the smallest company that I've worked for so far. It's actually still pretty big.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
But at present, I work a lot within the space of climate risk and trying to help companies think through what their present and then also longer term risks could be, kind of depending on how things play out. If we end up in a much higher emissions and like higher warming scenario than we are at present, or if we start to get these emissions under control and things like net zero by 2050 actually come true, how is that going to fundamentally change the way that your business operates, the way that your customers demand your products and services to kind of take shape and come to life. We think through kind of the business implications of that, as well as I personally partner with a team within Ramboll who does really extensive physical climate risk modeling and says, here are every one of your sites, and here's what we can know from the climate modeling data about fires, floods, hurricanes, you name it, because a lot of companies have just historically looked at what their exposure is from the lens of insurance, which is insurance companies tend to be interested in what's happening right now, not what's going to happen to your property 25 years from now, because by that time they can either drop you or raise your premium, right? And so that's not really their problem. And they also have very limited kind of types of physical hazards. Like maybe they're interested in kind of hail, right? And maybe they're interested in flooding, but they don't look at the full spectrum of physical impacts that we will witness as a result of climate change. So I work a lot in that space as well as within circular economy. So I have a lot of heart and a lot of love for these closed loop designs for, reducing the amount of virgin materials we're sourcing from the get-go and trying to use more responsible materials, but also thinking through what are these kind of reuse cases and how can things not have kind of end of life, but more of just end of use cycle so that we can have things be designed in a more modular and hopefully more monomaterial way. So really thinking about the health of materials through the entire, the whole life cycle truly, so that we can have less that just goes to waste. This idea that we buy something and then it kind of immediately drops in value. And then, especially the packaging that it came in is like this very tangible and almost for consumers like a visceral reminder of their their waste creation. And so I think that, the more that we can minimize that and start to actually package things like within packaging, we talk a lot about fit for use, and we have these long lists of criteria of like, how long something needs to be able to last on a store shelf, right? And how high it needs to be able to fall from to still be able to be, useful for consumers and things. And so we have this long criteria of what fit for use is. And I think that it's really over-engineered, to be honest, because for something like a shampoo bottle, right, it's going to take us maybe a couple months to use it. And it's going to maybe, that entire, cycle is maybe 4 years, right? Like maximum that it's going to exist in this world with product in it, as far as being warehoused forever and maybe ending up at some discount store right after it didn't sell at a retailer. That's really different. 4 or 5 years is really different than the 400 years that it's going to take for that plastic bottle to actually degrade or decompose. And so that to me that's not fit for use. Like that's fit for extreme. And so I think we need to be really dialing back the materials that we use and think of as status quo for our pretty innocuous, daily goods.
Man, I agree with that a lot. Good luck selling that. Well, you are selling that, right? How's it going?
Pretty good. I think also to your point, there are all of these different drivers, but fundamentally, to be able to think through what the innovations need to be, even if you're not enacting them right now, it's much better to have a plan that you can put into action than to realize that you have no plan at all when the world changes on you on a dime. And so, we work through with business leaders to think through their strategy and like, how can this be rolling and how can we roll this out on one product line that actually has a consumer that is really interested in that. And maybe it's a European consumer and maybe it's a younger consumer, what have you, but where we think it'll work because you're not always going to have, and we are very familiar with change, right? Your consumers change, your consumer preferences and behaviors change. And so being able to anticipate that and think through kind of what the world is going to need. And at the same time, thinking through things like these EPR schemes. This eco-modulation, you're going to be taxed basically, you're going to have fines higher based on the types of materials that you choose to use in your portfolio. So, that's happening. You have your consumers changing on one side, you have your regulations and how you're going to be fined on another side, but you also have oftentimes this, aspect of your greenhouse gas emissions and everything that you buy and as part of your packaging portfolio falls into your, scope 3, category 1 of purchased goods and services. So ultimately everything that you are putting on that manufacturing line, there's a, an emissions factor, associated with that. And so if you're not thinking about how can I turn down the dial on each of these, again, it's not because of the goodness of my heart. It's like, no, because I am a responsible business leader and I want to make sure that we are going to be in demand in the future and we're going to have a profitability in the future and that we're going to be protecting our bottom line and still deliver, the products that we want and have promised, our consumers for, maybe a generation.
Yeah, doing it because it's good for the planet is not reason enough for everyone, but
not in
money
America,
is, right?
but money usually
Not in
works.
America.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what are there industries you're having a lot of success working with? Or are there some industries you're working with more than others? Is it more what types of companies are you having success with, I guess? Is it more about the size of the organization, where they're from, what the culture is, industry, kind of who are you having a lot of luck with?
Well, we work, wildly across sectors. And so on a given week, I have worked with, a battery recycler, a frozen burrito brand, and a law firm. It's like, it's just like it runs.
How
it
much
runs
of that has
the
been
gamut.
packaging work?
A decent mix. Yeah, it all just kind of depends. But I think like to get to the crux of the question is of like where it works and when it works is not necessarily sector specific. I mean, each of these industries are kind of moving at their own pace based on their own pressures. Where we actually and there are leaders and laggards, in every one of those industries, right? So there's people who are really ambitious, and a lot of clients that we work for, they just want to stay compliant, and they just don't want to be reactive, right? And so they just want to stay like a half a step ahead of what they absolutely have to do. And so where we get a lot of traction and we see a lot of progress is within organizations that don't necessarily have like really unique or charismatic like change agents within them. It's really about the companies who are willing to engage in change management. And so that's really that's what separates the winners from the losers, because I think we've all probably been in or seen those organizations that have a really awesome leader that gets put into some position, and they drive all kinds of great progress. And then as soon as they leave, everything kind of falls apart. So that's really what we aim to avoid when we work with clients, because we're looking to understand what are your decision-making processes? What is everyone's and every kind of function's incentive around these different topics, right? How are their decisions being incentivized today? And can we change or just alter kind of the information that's brought to those decision-making points? Because if you have a little bit more information, and oftentimes it's, like you said, understanding your own information and your own data in order to have a better informed stance on this and to look at things with a bit more context and kind of big picture thinking, that's where we see things shift. Because it's not that you need to like scratch everything and now become some new sustainable version of yourselves, right? It's like thinking through how are we allocating, money, like our money for CapEx spending. Like if we're building a new packaging line, what's the energy intensity of that line? And are we thinking through kind of what the overall cost of this is going to be, not just the initial investment, but how energy intensive it is, what type of energy, like what's the energy source for that, right? So I think that if you have more information that's being brought to the table, then you can have more robust conversations. And as long as sustainability gets to be a part of that, it doesn't have to be the deciding factor, but putting sustainability in terms of the particular context. So if we're talking about, a cap spec, maybe it's about PCR content. If we're talking about a manufacturing line, maybe it's about energy intensity. And so it depends on like what we're talking about, but we need to dial into away from this general language and really getting the specifics of, have we thought about how much this is going to use? Have we thought about how much that it's going to use? And when you can have that also on the criteria list, you start to get to better answers, fundamentally. And so again, sustainability thinking doesn't have to be the only option. It just needs to be part of the discussion, and you can choose different things. But if you're not considering it, and if you're not considering alternatives, then you're not really being fair to your company, like your future company, or your future selves.
Love it. Okay. What's your favorite part about your job right now?
My favorite part is actually getting to, speak with business leaders and those decision makers. I think that a lot of companies, they're not trying to, be unsustainable, right? For lack of a better term. But they really have just been working really hard, oftentimes for decades, right? To make this one thing well, or to make these 200 things well. And it's really just a lack of education because, to your point, I don't have an academic, background in this space. I have lived experience and kind of went to the school of life for sustainability. But a lot of our business leaders today, they just are not educated in this space. And so to me, my favorite part is being able to bring that information to them. Oftentimes it's their own information and just showing the mirror, right? Pulling up that mirror so that they can see themselves a bit more clearly, and see the way that their organizations are functioning a bit more clearly, because it's really all about that incremental change and making a few different tweaks that can be self-perpetuating. Because now we have a new incentive structure, so now we're striving towards a different goal than we were before when we were only thinking about profitability. Now we're thinking about long-term profitability and what's our overall return of investment going to be if we don't think about the next 2 years, but we think about the next 20 years, right? Then we start to get to different answers for our decisions. So my favorite part is really getting to engage with those business leaders because people want to do the right thing. They just aren't always confident in what that right thing or the next right thing is. And so I really enjoy being able to be a sounding board for people and be kind of the trusted advisor and partner as we work through that, because things are always changing, and so the rules of the game are constantly changing as a new regulation comes out, or you get a new investor on board, or your customer base completely shifts, and now that those questionnaires that were voluntary are now serious, right? And so all of these things are always shifting, and so our priorities have to shift with that, but being able to navigate, business leaders through that is really the most rewarding part about this, because even when something like compliance is what's driving it, compliance is a thing that we have to do. But if we can start to see it as something that we get to do, and we get to better understand about ourselves by having to disclose this information, we can have such better outcomes and think more critically about how to change that narrative and flip the script. Even if it's not immediately, maybe we just check the box this year, but in 3 years, it may change the way that your organization runs. Yeah. And that to me is super powerful.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's take a minute and pretend like your boss is not watching this. Okay. You are obviously wicked smart. You're driven. You're articulate. You've got a pretty good vision for what you think is important in the world. What's next for Grace Cook? What do you need to accomplish for you to feel like you've had a successful career?
I feel pretty good about things right now. So I think I should give myself a little bit of credit. I'm not really chasing too much at the moment. I feel very, very grateful to be in a place where, it's always been clear to me that I'm going to work really hard no matter where I land. And so I feel really grateful to be able to work really hard on, ideas, concepts, work that matters to me, and ultimately that I feel drives an impact that is real and is my small contribution to this world. And so I feel pretty good about where things are right now. I will say in the position that I currently sit, I very much get to be a generalist, and that is that's probably at my heart what I am. And even I had a packaging professor, Bob Moore, who said like packaging is an inch deep and a mile wide, right? Because it's glass, it's metal, it's paper, it's plastics, all of these different, it's films, it's rigids, all these different things. And so you have to kind of know a little bit about a lot, and you can go really deep on any one of those things. But I never, planned to or desired to. I really like to see the interconnections between these kind of disparate topics. And, if you broaden that out to the idea of sustainability, like, decarbonization and circular economy and climate risk, like all of these things have all of these intersections. And to me, that's the fun part, is starting to think about how they impact one another. I would love to be able to work with organizations and maybe even particularly kind of like industry groups, because as we mentioned earlier, our clients are all over the place, which makes this job really fun and means that you're, constantly learning. But I think to have a bit more focus on a particular industry, kind of solving a particular sustainability problem, I think could be another really interesting, step, because I've gotten to work with a few different industry groups as clients. And I really enjoy getting to kind of understand this particular context and start to solve that and listen to all the voices in the room who have been doing that for 30 years. They always have different perspectives about how they can solve this problem or not. Everyone has clear ideas about what's definitely not going to work because we've tried it before, right? And I really do enjoy working in that space and kind of managing the multi-stakeholder engagement so that we can get to a solution that works for everyone and actually feels like it's going to address the problem for everyone.
Somebody wants to contact you and talk about sustainability. What's the best way to do it?
I mean, find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's pretty easy. I'm Grace Cook, Circularity.
Grace, I think this has been a fantastic conversation and a good insight. And I've talked to a lot of degreed packaging engineers in my career, right? And it's been pretty obvious to me that there are a lot of different ways a packaging education can take you, and a lot of different ways your career can go. This one is smaller than a lot of other. You're not the only person I think that's just gone into sustainability, but the width that you're looking at it, the different angles you're taking, I don't think that's very common. And you've got packaging as part of your career, but this holistic approach is a welcome development for me to hear about. And sounds like it's been a very dynamic, exciting place for you to be too.
It's been fun for me. Yep. Still out here learning. And I think the fun thing about sustainability, like so many other, vectors, is like it is a landscape that is constantly changing. The things that we're talking to clients about now are completely different than what we were talking to clients about 4 years ago. So, it keeps things really.
And it'll
really
change again next year or next week. It's
truly
just
next
faster,
week.
right?
That's very true.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time, Grace. I really appreciate it. This has been another episode of Packaging Speaks. Grace Cook, you've been a fantastic guest. We will see you all again in a few weeks. Thanks so much.